Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm joined today by Father Boquet, our president. Welcome, Father.
Well, thank you very much, Colleen. Always great to be with you and have our little discussions.
Yeah, and today we're going to be talking about Sound of Freedom, human trafficking, and then how porn feeds the human trafficking industry. So let's just start with the fun topic. Have you seen Sound of Freedom? What do you think of it?
I have. And it's a fantastic, movie. And I hate to say movie, presentation, documentary, how everyone wants to maybe put it into a certain way of approach. But for me, I looked at it as something that's highlighting a very real issue. So I didn't look at it from a movie point. I looked at it really from an exposition, someone exposing a real problem that's not only in the United States, which obviously it's focusing in primarily, but it's looking at a global issue. It's a massive human issue that we need to talk about.
Well, I think it did in a sense like what real literature and stories and art are supposed to do, where it has the drama, it has as a movie, it's enjoyable to watch from the watching a movie perspective. If it wasn't a true tragedy that was going on and it wasn't true, you'd be able to watch it from an entertainment perspective. But because it's about something true, it's telling a dramatic story in a way that when you watch it, it draws you into it and it makes you care about it. And it's doing what art's supposed to do because it's telling a story that's urging you to then go out and do something about it.
I agree. I mean, I think obviously it has real characters. It has people that are being brought into the light. People. This is a story about human beings, and I think that's what's touching so many people who now have seen it. And it's actually been competing very strongly with very much secular movies out there. And it really does show that people are surprised by the content. They are horrified by the content, and it's sparking conversation, which is drawing people to the movie,
which is the point. It's really good storytelling, and it's motivating people to do something about it, which is the point of movies and storytelling.
Exactly.
Why do you think it was so successful in the U.S.? Do you think it was just because it was well made? Do you think it was because of the topic of conversation, a little bit of everything?
I think all the above, but I think once the message got out, because the article I wrote about, after having seen it and also then wrote My Spirit of Life on it, what really caught my attention was the fact of how it had been attempted to be silenced for so many years. And just that story by itself is amazing, which I know we won't have time today to talk about, but just the idea that how it's been this subject, which is very real, being suppressed. It's not in the main media. You don't see it out on the social lines of the main secular media today. Maybe a little story here and there, for example, like the great tragedy of those container cars, that trucks that came out of Mexico, with all these people dying, from and it's a tragedy. But we're talking about human trafficking here. We're talking about different layers of the human picture.
Yeah, well, it was also interesting because they tried to silence the movie. There was so many articles coming out being like, this is a conspiracy theory, this is a QAnon movie, and it was just interesting to see a lot of mainstream sources trying to suppress it by saying this isn't true, it's not as big of a deal. They over-dramatized it.
Right.
But whether or not you want to argue about the details of what went into making a movie to the storytelling part of it, human trafficking is real.
Very real.
And just because you're suppressing a movie, you can't deny that human trafficking is happening.
Even the Biden White House has talked about it. So so you go to our own website now, and some things have come off the website, and because I wrote about that as well in my column. But the reality is that, and the numbers are very low. From the website on the White House, it estimates over 25 million people are trafficked on it. So that number is really conservative. When you start looking at the larger picture. So what the Sound of Freedom does is it really rings this great loud bell that this has a human face. These are human beings that are being exploited, manipulated, used as if we were using objects. And I think that's what captures people because, they see that there's an injustice here. And it's involving people of different age groups. I mean, we can go from young children who are being exploited all the way to people of certain skills and abilities being exploited. And people, in a sense, want to believe this is not real. But it's hard to hide the facts when you realize that story after story coming out of not only the States, but coming out from every part of the world, that this is very real. And that, and all I would say is this, and I'm going to tell you one little story, then I'll throw it right back to you because it's a human story, and it involves human trafficking. So now this is on the labor side. So
Okay.
this was a true story that came out of one of the Asian countries, and it was basically they found human trafficking around fishing of so like tilapia farm, something like this.
Hmm.
And this happened a few years ago. So I happened to be in the country at the time when I heard the story, and then I saw the headlines. And what happened was just one little quick thing. It would be like you had a 15-year-old son, one day just disappears.
Oh my gosh.
Fast forward 20 years, they find him. So here you are, this child's mom. Where is my son?
Yeah.
Thinking my son is dead, don't know where he is, and then 20 years later, well, which is a blessing, he is alive. But it's a real story. And there were so many, I forget how many. I mean, it was over 100 people they found, and these were all people that had been kidnapped, trafficked. And so imagine if that would a 20-year-old married gets kidnapped, trafficked, and then you think, if you're his spouse, my husband's gone, so you remarry, you have a family. 20 years later, here he is. So that's the human element to this. And then behind all that, who are the traffickers? Who are the ones doing this?
Yeah.
What is their motivation? So Sound of Freedom really brings this right to the forefront, and it uses all the techniques that you mentioned earlier. I mean, and it does, and it captures you, and it gets you angry. It gets you sad. It brings a tear to your eye. It gets you back being angry again.
It's the power of storytelling to put a human face on it. I think there's a quote, and I know it's about Russia, and I want to say it was either Stalin or Lenin, so someone who was like bad who gave the quote originally, I think, but it was basically that one death is a tragedy and a million is a statistic. Right. And it's the same kind of thing when it comes to this of, you could say there's that many million people that are being trafficked, and you hear that number and you're like, okay, it's a big number. But what does that mean? But then you have a movie like this where you put like the two children, the boy and the girl, the siblings, and you put that very human face on it, and all of a sudden, then you hear that statistic and you just are like, that's like a million of people just like this.
And then how many do not have the face? In other words, how many people that have fallen out of their family relationships, maybe are transients, maybe migrant workers, just disappear. And no one knows where they are. So no one's out there wondering, where are they? Yeah. So is that other side too, and trafficked for different reasons, and those stories are also coming out where, people are being used for their body parts. Yeah. It's just, so there's so much to this story that needs to be addressed. And I'm very grateful, and the Lord in his own timing, allowed it to be, put on the back burner, come back up front, put back. It's all about timing, and we have to trust that the Lord really, really gave grace to the people who were, behind this to move it to make it become reality, and to all the actors and the producers and everything else. And I think it's just the right time, because it's just everything going on in our world today. People need to see that evil still exists, and that a great injustice is being done.
Well, and there's already been backlash against like companies that are doing like the Pride stuff during month, or against like attacking kids' innocence. Right. And so I think that it really brought to people's attention that there's other ways that children's innocence is like being attacked. Right. It was just another facet of the attack on children that's going on in today's culture, from so many different angles, from abortion, from propaganda to sex ed in schools, like all the things that we talk about on this podcast. Right. That was what I walked out of the movie, like grasping. Like I was just like, oh my gosh, this is such a big problem. Like children are so under attack. And then I just like had this like, and I deal with the other ways that children are attacked every day at work. Like it was almost like, this is such a big problem, but I am used to dealing with so many other big problems. I can't take on a new one. But like, if you think about it, they're like, kids are attacked from the moment they're conceived with contraception, like the abortifacients, and then you have abortion, and then they're born, and the people start trying to teach them like the sex ed, reverse sex ed, trying to corrupt them then, and then they risk being trafficked. Like there's just, innocence and children are under such attack. And that's what I walked out of it being, just like, this is just one part of such a big problem.
Right. And with that, I walked out, thinking, is just going, okay, what am I going to do about it? So that's what I said. It touched people in so many different ways, and just the two ways that we just expressed, for you showing a larger picture, that you knew about, but it just really brings it right in your face. Yeah. And for me, it just moved me to the emotion of saying, I'm really upset with this. And of course, having given presentations on the issue of human trafficking, it's part of our educational program, in the sense of exposing the evil that we see in our world, what we call the culture of death. And so this is another aspect of that, where we treat the human person as something versus someone that commands respect in all moments, from the beginning of life till its natural end. And so I walked out just being, reaffirmed in the fact that there's work to be done.
Mhm.
And this movie just becomes another opportunity. If it wouldn't be so long, we can put it into our educational, but I'm going to pull parts out, when I get, if I can get permission for some of that. But it's great to show people, because many people, even in the developing world and other parts of the mission field, this is happening, but because their access to the media, access to to daily news is not as it is available to us. These stories, they're not told here. So how much more less they're told there? But they do have stories, because you'll hear them from families. I'm thinking of one just in my mind, of a family whose daughter just disappeared, and just have no idea where their daughter is. The assumption is that she's dead, that something happened to her, but
you don't know. That's
don't
got to be
know.
so hard. Like,
Right.
it's hard enough to have a child die. It's got to be so much harder to just not
The
know.
unknowns. That's right.
I know that like a lot of the movie took place in Latin America. Like
Right.
the original kidnapping happened in Latin America, where they rescued the children was Latin America. Is human trafficking like just a Latin American problem? Because like, I mean, I know it's
Yeah.
bigger than that, but I know that some people watching the movie came out being like, okay, like that's a big problem there, but it's not really happening as much in the US. And obviously it happens somewhat here, but can you speak to why it's a bigger issue and like what role America has in it?
Well, I would say it's very important that, of course, the stories are being told from the Latin American experience. So that's the point. But we could have easily have transferred that into any Asian country. We can move that into any part of Oceania and out of Africa. So it's just that this story really centered around these two, brother and sister, and then just developed from there. And then it just involved the Latin American community. But we do know that's happening out of Latin America. We do know it's coming out of Africa. So it's a global issue.
How are Western nations involved? Like the United States, Canada, those like the rich Western nations. How are they involved in this whole industry?
Well, got to peel it back, and it's something that you have to look at. I said earlier, who's behind all of it? What are the motivations? So if we really peeled it back further, it's what we've talked about many times in our podcast. What is the vision of the human person? So if I look at humanity as an opportunity to further my business or to further my ideology, then again, I'm approaching the human person as an object, a thing to be used, to be manipulated, to be exploited. And it doesn't matter who that person is. It doesn't matter of fact, in my mind, it's not a person at all. It's a thing to be used. So if I'm going to have a mindset of business, then I need people to work in my business to make it happen. So if I have a massive farm, I need people that I don't have the money to go out and buy all this major equipment, but I can employ people, so I can come from that farming. We also know in the service industry, in the hotel industry, the restaurant industry, that's a huge market, for waiters and waitresses and busboys and the whole litany of people that we don't even see, outside of the kitchen, And so the motivations are there. Same thing on the pornography side. You have another dark side of this. So when you look at this, and that's the idea of how a person approaches. And if they have that mindset, then really there's no end to the mindset. Anything goes.
Yeah.
And so you look at what industry is being fed in this. And from the Western point of view, again, it's about exploitation, and it's also about money. It's about power. It's about, having, making as much money as you possibly can, no matter how you get there.
Are people from Western nations driving this industry?
They are very heavily involved because, when you look out of Europe, you look out of the United States, you look out of Canada, you look in, other parts of the world in the sense of what we call the developed world, you will see these markets available. I think what people need to do, and I'm not going to, they're not the same, but there is a similarity. So let's look at the migrant worker. Okay. So different situation, but what we have is because of poor ability of finding work in their own country, what happens is they have to leave their country to go look for work in another place, which then separates them from their families, separates them from their culture, their religious practice, and in many cases, they begin to get absorbed into a very, very dark place. We see people where the breakdown of their marriage, they remarry in another country. We see the whole issue of promiscuity, and so that's why the church herself actually has a tremendous outreach to the migrant worker, and actually but it actually has so many things where it's speaking out to support the migrant worker, to prevent them from these trappings.
Well, then you also have children growing up without a family member around too. If the
Right.
family member is traveling
Right.
for X amount of time of the year because they're not able
Correct.
to be there, you have children growing up without one of their
Right.
parents.
So I don't want to compare the two. They're not the same, but there's some similarities, because then the person who's working in that situation, can also be easily exploited, manipulated. And, and I've seen this, and this is where I do see the similarity. So for example, what you see with human trafficking would be, and I've seen this with heard stories from people in different parts of the world that I've visited with migrant workers. So if I come in and say, Colleen, I have a job for you. I know you need work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay for your travel. I'm going to pay for you to come to this country. You're going to work in this business for me. This is the partner I've been with. And I'm going to hold on to your visas and your passport for you because I have to prove this to the government. And so, but I'm going to give them back to you, and you owe me nothing other than you have to work for a year here, and you're going to get paid, and you're going to get housing and all this stuff. And so, then you arrive, and all of a sudden, you don't get your passport. You're an illegal, basically working in this country, and all this thing unfolds, and it can go in so many directions from there. And I've seen that happen, and I've heard stories with those who are legitimately looking for work. So a migrant worker moving into another territory,
using a legitimate means,
trying to get
trying
there,
to,
but
yeah.
then all of a sudden gets caught in a similar situation where they can't afford to go home, they can't afford to do anything, so they're completely dependent. And here you have a very similar situation. Person finds himself in need, and the same manipulation occurs, but it becomes darker and twists into other things.
Yeah.
And so I think that that what the Sound of Freedom does is it also makes me look. And I know that in the movie they point out different ways that this is unfolding. I myself, again, having spoken on this and written on this, give an example. Think of the people who might be mowing my grass. What about the person that has cleaned my hotel room? Or maybe the person that might be, moving my luggage around in an airport. Maybe the taxi cab driver that I got into in the main city. There's so many ways that face is there. And, and we don't think to look because we're not thinking about it. And what this movie's done is it's opened people's eyes and wonder, especially myself, even in Rome, for example, the Holy Father has talked about this quite a bit. I remember in Rome, I came, our offices, we have an office in Rome right near the Vatican.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, and I'm walking down to the office, moving through St. Peter's Square, and I come across a young female vendor, like you see in the piazza all the time, and she's African. And so she walks up to me, and her English is very broken. So I speak to her in French. I can hear an accent. And so she just pauses, and she doesn't respond. So then I greet her in Italian, just trying to see. And and she was very nervous. And when it happens, there's people around.
Yeah.
And so I can tell something was not right. Now, do I know the whole story? I don't. I'm making some assumptions here. But she very quickly moved away from me. Now, I'm dressed as a priest. She sees priests all over the place. So it's not like I'm harmed her. I'm in a public place. But you can tell she was very, very uncomfortable.
Do you think she was uncomfortable because you saw that she wasn't from there and she was afraid she was being watched by someone? Is that what
it could be?
That's kind of what came to my mind.
It could be, or it could be because what we see, in some situations, there are people that they work for and who are assuring that they're not, that they're doing their job.
I know that when I was over there, we were told, because you have the people on the streets who beg for money,
Correct.
And we were told basically that you have to walk by them because they're not allowed to keep the money. They're fronts for these other gangs. And so if you give them something, it won't actually be helpful to them. And there are places in the city they can go for help. But it was just like really hard because you want to reach out. And it's like, and you don't like it because you feel like you're getting numb to their need.
Right.
But at the same time, if you actually give them something, it's not actually going to help.
Absolutely, and that's very true. And so I'm not saying that I don't know if she's trafficked. All I'm saying is that I'm suspicious. So what I did is I gave her a card to religious sisters that actually are working with ladies, particularly this particular group, with the women who are on the street or maybe in this situation. So I gave her, and it had all different languages on it, and I just gave it to her before she walked away. And so I don't know what ever happened, but you this is the kinds of encounters,
You need to have your
that
eyes open so you can see it.
open and realize this is a human being. This
Yeah.
is someone's someone. And I mean, in Rome, there are many nationalities and
Yeah.
ethnic groups there. So they come from all over the world. So, but you can pick up on things when you move around. I think that the real thing the movie does is it pricks my conscience
Yeah.
and it pricks my sensitivities, not to go looking for conspiracy behind every door, by no means, but to be aware, to
Mhm.
be what is the situation? What is this? Is it in my community? And the
Yeah.
probability is, if you live in near a major city, you ought to open your eyes. I
Yeah.
mean, Orlando is
Or by a crossing of interstates.
that's right. So you look at, the main points of entry. We know that Florida is one of them. We know that the issue around Orlando. We know that Houston. We know Los Angeles. We know New York. But there are many other points of entry. And once they're in,
Yeah.
so like the example would be, that these container cars that they had placed these souls in, and where were they going?
Mhm.
What is all this? So there's so much that the movie touches on
Yeah.
that should cause us to pause.
And one thing that I don't remember if it was as much in the movie is the pornography side of things. How, because I think a lot of times people can say, oh, trafficking is like their problem. It's a big city problem.
Right.
It's near the borders. It's maybe not in my small town, but porn has like infiltrated America.
Right.
How does porn feed the trafficking industry, and like how are they connected? Because
Yeah.
that's something that is going to touch every community,
Right.
especially with the prevalence of internet. So how does that tie in?
Well, let's tie it in back to the because they all tie in together in a sense. Because think about this,
Mhm.
a person who's providing a service,
Mhm.
there's someone that benefits from it. So whether we're talking about a person cutting your yard, a person that's carrying your luggage, and so forth and so on. So I think it's important for people to see that it does touch everyone, no matter where you are in this country, because it moves into many territories,
Mhm.
many places of business. And it's important for people to be sensitive to that and realize that, though I may be disconnected, because I live out in this rural community, doesn't mean that the community is not impacted
Mhm.
by some benefit of this. Because think about, in our own country with child labor laws, that today we know that we know we don't do to children. But the idea at one time, that's why they created laws and
Mhm.
why we created this to protect. But today, when you look at the pornography issue, because it's so vast and so global, and it's billions upon billions of dollars of an industry, and what we see again is back to exploitation.
Mhm.
And so what you have with human trafficking, you have what we call this kind of labor component. So looking for manual labor for workers.
Mhm.
And then you have another
The
side
sex
of
side
it.
of it, yeah.
There's another sinister side of the sinister side. And it just gets darker, because now you see from young boys, young girls, to teenagers, to young adults, and just moving up that chain of age, where they're brought into this industry. They're taken from their homes. I heard a story not long ago of the thank goodness happened in Rome. So it happened in New York. It's part of me. And she was outside with her son, one of her sons,
Mhm.
and he was out on the front lawn. Got a fence around it, and in the blink of an eye, a man on a bicycle pulled in, tried to convince the young man, her young teenager, to come with him.
Mm.
And thank goodness, the boy went inside. And I mean, and then this mother tells me the story. She says, and she was so angry because her child could have easily been brought into whatever this man was trying to do.
Yeah.
But on the evening news, the same man on the bicycle, they didn't catch him. Another kid was taken 2 streets over. So this is happening, in more places. And again, we don't know what the intention was in the sense of what we're talking about.
But it wasn't anything good.
Nothing good. And I think that, that and that's what and I always try to tell people with the pornography industry, it is purely about gratification and pleasure. And it's always at the exploitation of another human being,
Yeah.
which fits right into the mindset where trafficking occurs.
Are people trafficked to make porn?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's like a huge part
Sorry,
of it right there.
I should answer that directly a while ago, but yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
but like that's like at least part of it right there is
Yes.
that if people are watching porn, even if they're like, oh, I'm not involved in human trafficking, like I'm not going out
Correct.
with prostitutes or whatever, you're still watching something with somebody who may or may not have been trafficked. And even if it's someone who like quote unquote consented to it, you don't know what the story was behind that. And even if they wanted to, that's still a human person. They shouldn't be viewed that way.
Right. They're not a thing. Always someone. And so that's why I think when we look at again, the Sound of Freedom did not get into this part of it, because again, the story was about what it was, but it opened up the conversation. And if people would go to very trustworthy websites that are dealing with human trafficking, you would see so much more of this story, and you would realize that there is a very heavy percentage that are trafficked for sex, trafficked for prostitution. So not just pornography. Prostitution rings. You have all this exploitation that is happening, and so it's just to open oneself up to realizing that there's what Pope Francis calls modern day slavery. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. And so that's what Sound of Freedom does. It gives it a face, but it also helps it expose the name of it. This is human slavery. We are enslaving people, exploiting them, manipulating them, treating them not with the respect that that's commanded, but treating them as a thing. And the Holy Father is dead on target, and that's why he's been so vocal about this, because you see it, and it's think about the broken marriages, broken families, wounded families. The society, our society is cheapened because of this great evil, and for us to be just kind of do this to it because there's money, and that's the thing that we don't want to be honest with, and that is we're talking billions of dollars that are being made, over on this great evil, and they're very powerful people in positions of great influence, and so they work the system, and I think that's what Sound of Freedom also exposes. It exposes it, and when you hear people who have come out of the trafficking, to hear their stories and to hear how it all happened, how it occurred, that to me, I hope will be a follow-up, not so much in a movie style, but really to have some genuine documentaries, to really bring this to bear. Congress needs to hear the stories. This needs to all be put in panels and let people, again, hear what's happened, who's behind it, what's motivating this, how has government played into this? Not that government's endorsing it, but what's our silence? What are our laws? What are we doing to protect human persons from being violated in such a manner? And what are we doing to prosecute the people that are doing it?
And how are the things that are going on in our country affecting those other countries too?
Exactly right.
If we're the consumers, then there's these things going on in Latin America that Americans are consuming. It's like we still have a role to play in it. We can't just say it's their problem. If we have depending on how much of a role we have in it.
Where were these people being brought? And I think that's very important. And I think that when you realize, and I realize, that I'm benefiting in some way from this industry, and that's the question we have to ask: am I? So we often promote the boycott list in our work, and that's just another pro-life organization that exposes organizations and businesses that are supporting the culture of death. And
so not human trafficking per se, but just contraception,
generally.
abortion,
but
all of that.
But if I take the same approach and say, okay, let's say it's exposed that X is involved in this. Well, I'm no longer, I will not support X anymore. That makes volume, and that's what we've seen with the pornography industry too. When finally we stand up to it, and as we've seen in many of the states now, it's being challenged. But now these requirements of age verification, and it's going to either be by your driver's license, by a picture. You have to prove, and of course the industry is up in arms, because it's now limiting, and they're losing money, losing access. Now, how it's going to stand in the court, don't know, but it's exposed it. And it's saying, so why are you afraid of that? You should prove that this person is of age. You're exploiting children. You're bringing people in. So
we did the episode a year ago on Serena Fleites, who was 13 years old and was her boyfriend leaked the videos that she had sent him, which obviously wasn't a good thing. But then everything she went through because of that,
that's right.
It's the same. The industry is feeding off of innocent
So
children.
This is the same thing that needs to happen, is that it needs to be brought into light. So this is now the moment, it's been a subject that came before the movie.
Yes.
because I gave a presentation on this in different parts of our country.
Hmm.
I know the bishops themselves, the Catholic bishops, have been very vocal on this, and there have been many, many people vocal on this, and many local communities. For example, one I participated was with out of Miami, because
Okay.
that southern Florida area is a hot
Yeah, I
spot
was gonna say, do
for
they see a
entry.
lot there because they're pretty close to Cuba?
Right, and they get all these entrances in, and so they have a great active, and I know Bishop Noonan and many other bishops are very active in exposing this
That's
reality.
good.
And so
Yeah.
you can move into the Houston area and Los Angeles, and so, but we need more people to really get involved and to find out what's their local community doing, to
Hmm.
prevent this. So I really believe that the bell has been rung.
Well, someone also I know pointed out that if America has repercussions because of the drug problem in Latin America, we're also going to have the repercussions of
Of course,
the human trafficking. Like, it's naive to say that because the movie was talking about Latin America, that it's only a Latin American problem and the US
right.
doesn't have to deal with it. It's like, if we're getting the drugs up here, there's the people coming too, and
Where
we need to
where are the
wake
people
up.
being shipped to? Where are they
Yeah.
going? Who's benefiting? I would just say this, it just it's another point is just as a Catholic, and obviously as Catholics,
Yeah.
how do we approach this?
Yeah.
So first of all, the principle of solidarity is a very clear principle here. And it's whatever happens to my brother or sister happens to me. And what the movie also does is it puts a human face to the term or the phrase human trafficking.
Mhm.
And so by doing that, so the principle of solidarity comes in. This is someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's someone.
And they kept saying that. Like, what if this was your daughter? What if it was
Exactly.
your empty bed?
And as you said with pornography, not that I want to plant that seed in someone's head, but just to think the same way, that the person on that screen is
Is
someone's
somebody's
daughter, someone's son, someone. And whether they're of their own free will or not, the reality is there's an exploitation, and
Mhm.
all for the benefit of another human being who is benefiting from this situation. And this is why Pope Francis, again, and I think has really resonated with so many people, because he's just advocating and constantly mentioning this principle, talking about solidarity, talking about being aware of what's around you and what's affecting. So, for example, the migrants workers that recently drowned. The Holy Father. This was
Where
again.
was I
This
don't know
is
that story.
it's wasn't out. I'm trying to think where it wasn't out of India. I forget where it was, but recently he just. I think it was in Italy. There was a little something that occurred off one of the coastlines there.
Okay.
So it's a tragedy because they're coming from another country for whatever reason,
Hmm.
but a tragedy occurs, and so they drown. And so what the Holy Father is doing, I guess my point is that it's the issue of that's a human being.
Yeah.
No matter what's brought them to that moment, whoever it's to be mindful, to be compassionate, to be concerned, and not to do this, which is so easy to be indifferent. And it's we have to stir up people, and I think that's what this has done.
How do you go forward from here? Like, it's a really weighty subject, and no, you don't we don't want to close our eyes, cover, bury about ostrich, bury your head in the sand and
Right.
ignore it. But at the same time, we can't just keep dwelling on all the negative things that go on in society. So how do you not ignore the evil, but
Right.
go forward from here? How should listeners who've watched the movie, who are listening to the podcast, go forward from here?
Well, I think we have to educate ourselves. All right. So because of this is just like with abortion, we have a grave evil. This is a grave evil.
Mhm.
We're talking about, again, quoting Pope Francis, we're talking about modern day slavery. And I think many in our audience who might be familiar with Josephine Bakhita, if
Yes.
not, go read about her.
Yeah, she
So
is a
this is a
really,
person who was trafficked. All right.
yeah, because she was taken for slavery and brought to, she was from in Africa.
Right.
I forget which country. Where
Mhm.
was she taken to? Was it Italy?
It was Italy.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it was a time period,
Right. Well,
1800s? I don't
let
remember.
people read.
Well, it's
Let
okay.
them read. Let them read. And I think what's important is by just getting people to really realize that this has happened before. It's still happening. But the point being is just trying to get people to say, become knowledgeable,
Mhm.
educate myself. What is happening in my community? Is anything happening in my community? How do I protect my own children? How do I protect my own family members? Part of it is what Pope Francis has been saying. There's an entire Vatican document on this.
Really?
It was in
Wait,
my.
which one?
Well, I don't have the full name of it right now
Okay.
because I didn't come prepared for that. But it's in my Spirit and Life
Is
column
it an
that I wrote
encyclical?
on the Sound of Freedom.
Is it an encyclical or is it just a
No,
document?
it's just a document.
Oh, okay.
One of the Vatican dicasteries, but it's on the issue of human trafficking. So
Okay.
it's a very well done, and it actually gives a pastoral plan, how to implement education, how to form people, because that's what the Holy Father gets into, is that there's a blindness, and not a blindness by intent, but it's this indifference that happens because people are busy. Life is full, and we're not thinking, about what's happening around us, which goes back to the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is what the document talks about. And I highlighted in my article on the Sound of Freedom because I think it's so important for people to see what the church is saying here. So there is an evil, there's something wrong, something grave here. And yes, I'm with you, Colleen, completely. Dwelling on it, just in a sense of just to dwell on it is not the answer, or in a sense of thinking, all this stuff is happening around me. What do I do? The first thing I would say is we need to be involved. We need to engage the conversation. We need to call upon our political leaders and our local leaders. If they're not aware of the situation, what is happening in our community? What are our police doing about it? Are our police aware of it? If there is a ring in our own community, what are we doing to break this ring down? In other words, to really form what the Holy Father is saying are communities of awareness.
Would that come down to then the principle of subsidiarity, where you're dealing with it as is appropriate on the local level and then as is appropriate on the state level? Like each level has to deal with what they can deal with.
Right.
And
and with that would be is just, and that's why I think, what the Sound of Freedom does is it actually, does that because the person sitting in that theater chair, are maybe able to watch it from their home now. But the idea is, okay, what happens when I get out that chair?
Yeah.
All right. And so what am I going to do? And I think it's like all the other things that we address, whether we're talking about the assault on marriage, whether we're talking about the assault on human life in the womb, or the issues of euthanasia and so forth and so on. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
And we can make a difference. Just this movie and the people who are willing to have the courage to put this movie together, to pull the story together, to know that it's not going to be popular in the sense of the secular narrative, knowing that it's going to be assaulted by the media, but nonetheless, we're going to go far. And they did. And they had the courage and still have the courage to be ridiculed. But guess what? It's becoming less and less because people are hearing more about this. And so
it started the conversation as soon as it got released, and as soon as they started telling people to tell their friends. And like the thing at the end was a really good, the Pay It Forward campaign was a great way to get people engaged and start that conversation too. But
and I remember in Florida, and when I participated in a seminar on human trafficking, was listening to the personal testimonies of people who've been trafficked.
Yeah.
And the people in the audience who were just people from the community. Some people were there to participate in the more formal educational components, but there were a lot of people there that were just interested in the topic.
Yeah.
And to watch their faces when they meet these faces in a panel of people who have been trafficked, some for labor, some for sex. And it's just you can you can almost feel the air. It was so quiet, and people were just caught off guard, thinking, "Wait, that's one community over. That's 3 streets over. Wait a minute, that could happen to my own kids." Yeah. So you got all that happening around, and it just sparked a fire, and that's what this has an opportunity to do. And so I know that we threw a lot of subjects at people today, but there's a lot of linkage there.
Yeah.
There's a linkage, obviously, to the whole sex trafficking component, the whole pornography industry, and just people need to become more aware of this. Yeah. The other thing is, obviously, we have that labor side, which depends where you're looking, has a more dominant number in a sense of what we're seeing. And I mentioned, which is not connected directly, but I mentioned the migrant issue, and I think that also needs to be aware of in many people, and to be asking, because when you look at all of this, there's an injustice, Colleen, that's been done. A harm has been done, and a harm is being done. Yeah. And I believe that's what the Sound of Freedom did. It hears this great harm, and here are 2 faces, and among others, that have been harmed. And these are the people, and you're right, it's not a Latin American issue.
No.
And just like abortion is not just something in the country where it's legal,
Yeah,
it's a
it's
human issue.
affecting.
And we're all part of the human family. So that affects me as equally as anyone else around the world.
Well, thank you so much, Father, for talking about this
Sorry to be
today.
so impassioned, but
Oh, no, it's an important topic to be passionate about. So, yeah, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you.
And to all of our listeners, please like, subscribe, check out our new ebooks that we have coming up. I'll put them in the description and also link them on the end page for YouTube. And just keep on living the culture of life. Thank you, and God bless.